the secret that transformed our daycare. But what began as a simple observation about the fear of the dark would reveal a much deeper truth about what truly frightens our children in a world that values only what can be measured, photographed, and placed into quarterly parental satisfaction reports. The Daycare Little Stars Academy in Boulder, Colorado, was a monument to apparent perfection, a carefully curated showcase of modern ideals of early childhood education. Walls painted with rainbows meticulously studied by child psychologists to stimulate ideal cognitive development. Certified organic wooden toys that cost more than some families earned in a week. Certificates of excellence hanging with the calculated pride of those who understand that appearance is the most valuable currency in the competitive market of childcare. Everything there was designed to pass the rigorous checklists of anxious parents: safety, hygiene, curriculum, balanced nutrition. Everything, except what truly mattered in the most vulnerable moments of childhood. Mary Johnson, 68 years old, walked through the immaculate corridors like a familiar ghost, her quiet footsteps echoing the muffled sound of dignity being negotiated cent by cent, day after day. A retired teacher who had returned to work not because of renewed passion or rediscovered purpose, but because of the cruel necessity of life's relentless mathematics. Her husband Frank's retirement did not cover the experimental treatments for Parkinson's that kept his hands, once firm in building bridges that connected communities, steady enough to hold a spoon. Every hour Mary worked was worth 60 minutes of preserved dignity for the man who had spent 40 years building structures others would cross without a second thought. She watched the children during afternoon nap time, that sacred ritual when 20 small bodies were supposed to find peace under Egyptian cotton blankets that cost more than some of the furniture in her own home. But Mary saw what no one else saw, or perhaps what no one else wanted to see. Tiny fists clenched under the expensive duvets. Eyelids trembling even when completely closed. Breathing shallow and uneven, nothing like the deep sleep that the reports promised. The dark, that silent companion of rest that should have been comforting, was in truth a monster haunting the most vulnerable corners of those forming souls, a ghost stealing the peace parents paid dearly to guarantee. While the other teachers, young women with shiny degrees and rising careers, typed development reports on the latest tablets or organized photogenic activities for the daycare's social media. Mary stayed in the half-light of the room, watching with the eyes of someone who knew the nuances of childhood fear. She noticed patterns that escaped the assessment algorithms. How Liam, 4 years old, always curled up in the corner farthest from the window, as if desperately searching for the last strip of light that could push the shadows away. How Sophia, 3 years old, clutched her teddy bear not as a playmate, but as a fragile shield against imaginary monsters only she could see. How Noah, the quietest of the group, had nightmares so silent that only his tiny fingers, contracted in tension, revealed the terror inhabiting his dreams. The director, Sarah Mitchell, 35 years old, with a Master of Business Administration and Educational Administration from a prestigious university, moved through the rooms with a tablet in hand like a general inspecting her troops, checking efficiency metrics that reduced child development to numbers and charts. Nap time within established parameters, she noted with satisfaction, without realizing she was measuring only motionless bodies, not peaceful souls. The system she was so proud of was perfect on paper. Schedules synchronized with Swiss precision. Protocols followed with military rigor. Parents pleased with detailed reports. Everything ran with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, except the essential, the human, that which truly mattered in the frightened eyes of a 2-year-old child. Mary guarded her observations like dangerous secrets, forbidden treasures that could cost her a precarious job. She knew that in an era of security cameras in every corner and hands-free policies crafted by lawyers obsessed with liability, her simple act of watching too closely was already suspicious. In a world where touching a frightened child to comfort them could be interpreted as a protocol violation or, worse, as something sinister, her instinctive desire to offer comfort was a professional risk she could not afford. Not with Frank depending on every cent her minimum wage brought in. Not with medical bills piling up like silent threats in the darkness of the night. But then came that rainy autumn Monday that would change everything forever, a day that began like any other but would end redefining the meaning of care in her life. An unexpected storm plunged Boulder into an early darkness, and the daycare lights flickered menacingly before settling into a weak, ghostly glow. That was when Mary witnessed something that would haunt her in the silent hours of the night, something that would echo through her own nightmares. 20 pairs of children's eyes open at the same time. Not with the innocent curiosity of those facing the unknown, but with a primitive, ancient terror that seemed to rise from the depths of genetic memory. And in the center of the room, little Chloe, just 2 years old with enormous blue eyes, began to cry in a way that Mary recognized deep in her own gut. It was not the cry of a tantrum, nor of tiredness, nor of hunger. It was the raw sound of absolute loneliness, of primordial abandonment, of pure fear that no educational toy could calm. Mary froze in the doorway between bureaucratic duty and human compassion, between rules written by strangers in distant offices and the truth written on the terrified face of a child. The rules said she should call the supervisor immediately. The protocol demanded that she document the incident in the system. But her heart, shaped by 6 decades caring for children, first her own, then other people's, whispered a truth deeper than all the manuals combined. There, in that half-light heavy with childhood fear, was an emotional wound no certificate of excellence could heal, a fundamental need no expensive toy could satisfy. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 68 years of life on her curved back, the ghost of unpaid medical bills hanging over her conscience like a blade, and made a decision that would break every rule in the manual, defy every risk policy, and place what remained of her financial safety on the line. Because some truths are greater than the fear of poverty, and some children need more than protocols can offer. What began as duty became a mission when Mary discovered that her own past, the stormy nights on her grandfather's farm, the fear of the dark that no one understood, the loneliness of being the only child for miles of empty land, echoed with painful precision in the silent nightmares of the children who, without knowing why, began to trust her with a faith that broke hearts and healed souls. In the heavy half-light of the room, with the rain beating on the windows like distant drums announcing ancient storms, Mary slowly knelt beside Chloe's crib. Her knees hurt from the arthritis that had pursued her for years. Her back protested with aches that spoke of decades of hard work. But something deeper than physical pain guided her. A muscle memory of comfort. An instinct to nurture that time had not managed to erode. She began to hum softly a song her own grandmother had taught her more than 60 years earlier, on endless stormy nights on the wide farm in Nebraska. A simple melody, almost forgotten in the folds of time, that spoke of stars that kept shining steadily even when dark clouds hid them from human eyes. Chloe stopped crying almost immediately, her immense blue eyes fixing on Mary with a trust so complete, so absolute, that it shattered the older woman's heart into 1,000 pieces of mingled love and pain. It was exactly the same look her own daughters had given her so many years before they grew up and moved to distant states, before life separated them with miles of highway and oceans of adult responsibility. That look that said, "I know you will protect me," without needing any words. The primordial faith that ties generations together in an invisible thread of care. As she sang, her trembling hand gently stroking Chloe's blonde hair, Mary felt old memories surfacing from the depths of her mind like benevolent ghosts finally finding purpose. She remembered vividly being little, growing up as the only child of Italian immigrants who worked from sunrise to sunset on her grandfather's farm. Their hands hardened by the work of the land, their souls marked by the struggle to survive in a foreign country. The nights in that isolated house were the worst. The absolute darkness of the countryside without electricity. The wind howling through the trees like hungry wolves. The silence that seemed alive and threatening, full of secrets a child could not understand. Her parents, exhausted from the hard labor that barely supported the family, did not understand her deep, paralyzing fear. "You are too big for this nonsense," they said impatiently, without realizing that night terror does not obey the logic of age or adult expectations. It was her grandmother, a woman whose hands were calloused from the soil and whose heart was soft as fresh bread, who taught her the secret she was now sharing with Chloe. "The stars do not disappear just because we cannot see them from down here, my little Mary. They are still there, protecting us with their steady light, reminding us that darkness is temporary and that brightness always comes back, always." And on the scariest nights, when fear would not let her breathe, her grandmother sang that same simple melody that now soothed Chloe, turning terror into magic, darkness into possibility, the unknown into adventure. Now, 6 decades later and thousands of miles from that Nebraska farm, Mary saw the same primordial fear not only in Chloe's eyes, but in Liam's, in Sophia's, in Noah's, in all 20 children who slept, or tried to sleep, in that room. It was not the physical darkness that truly frightened them. It was the existential loneliness that it represented. The emotional abandonment implied when the lights went out and adults disappeared behind closed doors, leaving them alone with their childhood fears. They had expensive toys imported from Europe, branded clothes that cost more than Mary's weekly budget, and carefully balanced organic meals designed by nutritionists. But they lacked the essential, the fundamental. The visceral certainty that someone would be there in the dark, singing to chase away the monsters, holding their hands as they navigated the unknown territory of nightmares. In the days and weeks that followed, Mary began a secret ritual that became her silent mission. During afternoon nap time, while the other teachers busied themselves with administrative tasks or whispered about weekend plans, she moved like a benevolent shadow among the children. She whispered stories about constellations that protected dreams, about the moon watching over the sleep of little ones with a motherly gaze, about the sun that always returned after the darkest night. They were not complex or moralistic stories. They were simple promises in the form of soft words. Ancestral assurances that the world was not as frightening as it seemed to a child's eyes. That light existed even when invisible. That care persisted even when silent. Liam began to sleep in the center of the room, no longer hidden in the farthest corner like a cornered animal. Sophia hugged her teddy bear with less desperation and more genuine affection. Noah stopped having those silent nightmares that only his contracted fingers had once revealed. Small, invisible victories that no one noticed except Mary and the children themselves, who began instinctively searching for her eyes when they entered the room in the morning, as if seeking an emotional anchor in the noisy chaos of the day, a safe harbor in oceans of uncertainty. What Mary did not fully perceive was that her shared vulnerability, her own story of childhood fear overcome, created an invisible connection that transcended generations, social classes, and economic realities. She was not only comforting frightened children, she was also healing the child who still lived inside her, that scared little girl from Nebraska who finally found purpose and redemption in her own conquered terror, turning old wounds into balm for new ones. And when Chloe, on a particularly bright sunny morning, gave Mary a carefully scribbled drawing of stars and moons with the word "thank you" written crookedly but full of love, the older woman felt something she had not felt in years. Not just the fleeting satisfaction of a job well done, but the deep, visceral, almost painful certainty that some human connections are stronger than the relentless passage of time, more powerful than the deepest fears, and infinitely more truthful than any protocol or manual could ever hope to be. But our silent connection awakened the watchful gaze of a system that saw affection as risk, vulnerability as weakness, and compassion as a protocol violation. And when director Sarah began to watch Mary not as a teacher, but as a potential threat, what had begun as a secret mission turned into a dangerous game of emotional survival. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the shift of seasons in a mild climate. First came the longer looks from Sarah during morning meetings, her analytical eyes scanning Mary not as a colleague, but as a variable in a risk equation. Then came the questions disguised as professional concern. "Mary, are you feeling well? You seem so tired lately. I notice you spend a lot of time in the nap room. Is everything fine with the children?" Her tone was soft, almost maternal, but her eyes were those of a tax auditor examining suspicious books. Mary felt the surveillance as a physical weight on her shoulders. Every time she knelt to comfort a child, she felt the invisible eyes of the system on her. Every whispered story about stars seemed to echo too loudly in the stillness of the room. She began to calculate risks with the precision of someone who knows the value of every cent. If she lost this job, how long would they have until Frank's medical bills went unpaid? How many weeks until eviction? How many days until dignity became an unaffordable luxury? The tension reached its first peak during a surprise inspection by the state licensing department. Two inspectors in impeccable suits and neutral expressions walked through the rooms with tablets and checklists, their presence creating an atmosphere of imminent judgment. Sarah accompanied them like a proud host, highlighting each certification, each protocol, each metric of excellence. When they reached the nap room, Mary was humming softly to Liam, who had woken up frightened from a nightmare. Protocol 7B clearly violated, one of the inspectors whispered to the other, typing something into his tablet. Unnecessary physical contact during rest period. Sarah turned pale, her eyes meeting Mary's with a mixture of anger and fear. "Mary, please remember our hands-free policy during nap time," she said tightly, forcing a smile for the inspectors. "The children need to learn emotional self-regulation." Mary felt the words like physical blows. Emotional self-regulation, the phrase sounded so clinical, so inhuman when applied to a 4-year-old child trembling with fear. She stepped back, her hands empty and useless at her sides, while Liam looked at her in confusion, his eyes still wet with undried tears. The inspection report arrived the following Friday. Little Stars Academy retained its excellence rating, but with a troubling note in the emotional development section. Behaviors inconsistent with established protocols observed during rest periods. Additional training in appropriate contact policies is recommended. Sarah called Mary into a private meeting on Monday. The director's office, always impeccable, felt especially hostile that morning. Photographs of graduations and certificates on the walls silently witnessed the approaching confrontation. "Mary," Sarah began, her hands folded on the table as if praying for patience. "I understand that you come from a generation with different approaches to childcare. But we need to follow modern protocols. The hands-free policies exist for important reasons: protection of the children, protection of employees, reduction of legal risks." Every word was carefully chosen, each sentence a sugar-coated bullet. Mary listened, feeling the floor give way beneath her. She tried to explain, her words pouring out in a desperate torrent about childhood fear, emotional connection, about what truly mattered beyond reports and metrics. Sarah listened with an expression of professional pity. "Mary, this is a business, not a family. We have legal responsibilities, insurance companies to answer to, parents to satisfy. Your excessive affection is creating unrealistic expectations in the children and putting everyone at risk." The final blow came when Sarah slid a document across the table. "I am transferring you to archives and supplies. Less direct contact with the children, more administrative work. It is for your own protection." Mary looked at the paper, her trembling hands unable to pick it up. Archives and supplies, the dark storage room in the basement where problematic employees went before being conveniently downsized. She pictured Frank at home, his hands shaking more than hers, his hopes trembling with them. "Sarah, please," her voice was a hoarse whisper, "the children, they need to learn to be resilient." Sarah cut in, her eyes finally losing patience. "And you need to learn to follow rules. Mary. Or find another place to work." As she left the office, Mary felt each of her 68 years like stones tied to her ankles. She walked down the main hallway, where smiling photographs of children misled parents about the reality of modern childcare. Liam saw her and ran toward her, his arms open for a hug she could no longer give. She stepped back, her hands raised in surrender, her eyes avoiding his. The wounded confusion on the boy's face hurt more than any reprimand from Sarah. It was the first lost battle in a war she had not even known she was fighting, the war between bureaucracy and humanity, between protocols and compassion, between what is measured and what truly matters. Standing before the cell phone camera secretly filming her every move, with her job hanging by a thread thinner than the strand of hope of a scared child, Mary had to choose between protecting the fragile security that kept her sick husband alive or offering comfort to little Chloe, who cried with a desperation that echoed through decades of her own memories of abandonment. The transfer to archives and supplies was a silent humiliation that reverberated through every inch of the daycare. Mary now spent her days counting crayons, organizing paperwork, checking expiration dates on cleaning products, tasks any teenager could do, tasks that did not require 6 decades of experience with children, tasks that kept her far from the eyes that needed her most. The storage room was cold and poorly lit, smelling of dust and disinfectant, a tomb for dying careers. But even in forced isolation, Mary listened. She heard the distant crying of children during nap time, now without her comforting presence. She heard the other teachers rigidly following protocols, offering empty words instead of warm embraces. She heard the increasingly heavy silence settling where once there had been soft lullabies and whispered promises of hope. It was on an especially gloomy afternoon that fate decided to test her resolve one final time. Sent to fetch supplies from the main hallway, Mary heard a cry that made her stop instantly. It was Chloe, but not the usual cry of tiredness or frustration. It was the same sound of absolute panic from that rainy Monday, only now amplified by 2 weeks without Mary's comfort. She followed the sound to the nap room door and stopped there, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. Chloe was curled up in the same corner where Mary had first found her, her small body shaking violently, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails left red marks in her palms. The other teachers tried to distract her with toys, following the protocol of ignoring attention-seeking behavior, but Mary saw the truth. This was not attention-seeking. It was pure, primal terror. Then she saw Chloe's mother, a young, elegant woman with a cell phone in hand, secretly recording the scene with an expression of judgment and concern. Her eyes met Mary's, and there was instant recognition, a silent understanding of what was truly happening. Mary froze in the doorway, every fiber of her being pulled in opposite directions. On one side, the voices of fear and practical reason. Go back to the storage room. This is not your problem. You need this job. Frank needs this paycheck. Safety first, compassion later. On the other side, a truth deeper than all the rules combined. A child was terrified, and she was the only person who understood why and how to help. She looked at the mother's cell phone, knowing that every movement would be recorded, every gesture analyzed, every touch potentially interpreted as a violation. She thought about Frank at home, his hands shaking as he tried to take his medications, his dignity depending on her precarious job. She thought about the medical bills piling up on the kitchen table, the collection threats arriving in the mail, the quiet fear in her husband's eyes when he believed she was not looking. But then she looked at Chloe, really looked, and saw not only a frightened child, but the reflection of herself 6 decades earlier, alone in the darkness of Nebraska, waiting for someone, anyone, to understand that some wounds do not heal with toys or protocols. The moment stretched like an elastic band about to snap. Mary felt the weight of 68 years of choices, some right, some wrong, all leading to this exact instant in which everything that truly mattered would be defined by a single decision. Then, with a clarity that surprised her, she understood that some things are worth more than safety, more than a paycheck, more than her own future. That dignity is not in keeping a job, but in staying faithful to who you are at the most fundamental level. That love, when genuine, is always the right choice, no matter the cost. She walked toward Chloe, ignoring the teacher's stares, ignoring the cell phone recording, ignoring the shadow of Sarah who would surely appear soon. She knelt down, not with the hesitation of before, but with the certainty of someone who has finally found her purpose, and opened her arms. Chloe threw herself into them with such force that she almost knocked Mary over, her crying turning into sobs of relief. And Mary, forgetting all the rules, all the protocols, all the threats, began to sing that same old song, her hands stroking the girl's hair, her words creating a shield of love against the world. In that moment, while Chloe's mother kept filming with an expression that shifted from judgment to something like admiration, Mary knew that it no longer mattered what would happen next. She had made the only choice her soul would allow. And for the first time in weeks, she felt not fear, but deep peace, the quiet certainty that some battles are worth losing, as long as the war for what truly matters is won. My choice cost me everything that was left of security in a world that rewards conformity and punishes compassion, the job that paid for my husband's treatments, the respect of colleagues who once saw me as a mentor, and almost my own sanity when I realized that the price of genuine love was public humiliation and financial ruin. The dismissal meeting took place the next morning, as predictable as the sunrise after a stormy night. Sarah was not alone this time. With her sat a human resources representative, face professionally neutral and a thick folder of documents in hand. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in like a carefully set trap. "Mary," Sarah began, her eyes avoiding Mary's. "The video that Chloe's mother shared with us shows a clear violation of multiple safety protocols. Hands-free policy, appropriate contact policy, behavioral intervention policy." Every word was a hammer pounding nails into the coffin of her career. Mary listened, feeling herself detach from her own body, as if watching the scene from far away. She tried to explain one more time, but her words seemed to crash against an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy. "Unfortunately," the human resources representative continued, "given your refusal to follow established protocols after multiple warnings, and considering the legal risk your behavior represents for the institution, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately." The word terminate echoed in the room like a gunshot. Mary felt the floor disappear under her feet, the world blurring at the edges. She thought of Frank. Frank, who needed medication that cost more than her monthly salary. Frank, whose hands trembled a little more each day. Frank, who still looked at her with the same admiration as when they were young, as if she could fix anything. On the way home, the bus seemed to move in slow motion, each stop a marker in her descent into personal hell. She counted the money in her wallet, $73 until the next supposed paycheck that would never come. $73 to buy medicine, pay bills, keep a roof over their heads. When she arrived home, Frank was sitting on the porch, his hands resting on his knees like tired birds. "How was your day, my dear?" he asked, his voice a little shakier than usual. Mary could not say the words. She simply knelt in front of him, buried her face in his lap, and cried, not the quiet tears of sadness, but the deep, guttural sobs of absolute despair. Frank stroked her gently, his trembling hands doing the best they could, and in that moment she knew she had failed him in a way she could never repair. The days that followed were a waking nightmare of phone calls to insurance companies, visits to social service offices, and online job applications that never received a reply. Each no was a stab. Each closed door a reminder that her age, her experience, her compassion, everything she was, had no value in a world that wanted young, moldable employees willing to follow rules without question. The humiliation reached its peak when she met one of the daycare mothers at the supermarket. The woman avoided her, quickly turning down another aisle as if Mary carried a contagious disease. The silence was more eloquent than any accusation. She was now a pariah, a woman who had placed feelings above protocols, affection above conformity. On the darkest night, sitting in the kitchen with bills spread across the table like evidence of her failure, Mary looked at her hands, hands that had soothed hundreds of children over the decades, hands that now trembled not from arthritis, but from pure fear. She picked up a photograph of herself and Frank when they were young, smiling with the innocence of those who believe love conquers everything, and wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Perhaps Sarah had been right. Perhaps the world really had no place for compassion amid efficiency. Perhaps she should have followed the rules, kept her head down, preserved her meager security. Perhaps love, in the end, was a luxury people like her could not afford. She looked out the window at the stars her grandmother had loved so much, the same stars she used to sing about to frighten children, and felt an irony so deep it almost suffocated her. She had spent her life teaching others that light always returns, Yet now, at the bottom of her own personal pit, she could see no light at all. Only darkness, and the terrifying certainty that some falls have no bottom, only an endless continued descent. But at the bottom of the darkest pit my soul had ever known, I discovered that I was not alone in my fall. Other mothers who had witnessed the silent transformation I had worked in their children began to emerge as unexpected allies, forming an organic movement that questioned not only my dismissal, but the entire system of care that valued protocols above compassion. The first message arrived on a rainy Tuesday, when Mary had already accepted that silence would be her new constant companion. It was from Amanda, Liam's mother, the same elegant woman who had once avoided Mary at the supermarket. The message was simple, but the words carried the weight of genuine regret. "Mary, I need to talk to you. Liam is not the same since you left. He is having nightmares again. He is hiding in corners again. I was wrong about you." Mary read the message over and over, her trembling hands holding the phone as if it were a lifeline in a stormy sea. She did not answer immediately. Fear was still a very familiar companion. But then other messages began to arrive, like raindrops before a storm that would bring renewal, not destruction. "Sophia. Noah's mother, Noah drew you today. He said he misses the star grandma. We need to talk. Jennifer. Chloe's mother, the same woman who had filmed the final incident. The video I made was not meant to hurt you. It was to show the director what truly matters. She used it against you, and I feel awful about it. May I come and see you?" One by one, the mothers began to appear, not virtually, but physically, at her modest doorstep, bringing not only words of support, but concrete evidence of the impact Mary had had on their families. They told her stories of children who had regressed emotionally since her departure, of sleepless nights, of nightmares returned, of a light that had gone out in the daycare and that no expensive toy or certificate of excellence could rekindle. It was Jennifer, Chloe's mother, who brought the revelation that would change everything. She arrived with her laptop and showed Mary not only the original video, but dozens of others that the mothers had secretly recorded, videos of Mary singing to frightened children, whispering stories about stars, turning fear into magic. "We recorded them not to spy on you," Jennifer explained, tears in her eyes, "but because it was the only way to capture the beauty of what you did. We showed them to our husbands, to our families, as an example of what true care should look like." Amanda, the most articulate of the group, suggested a bold plan. "We are not just going to ask for your job back. We are going to demand that the daycare change its protocols. We will show them that what you did was not a violation of the rules. It was the very essence of what it means to care for children." In the days that followed, what began as a small group of concerned mothers turned into an organized movement. They created an online petition that detailed not only Mary's case, but criticized the entire modern child care system that prioritized metrics over emotions, protocols over human connection. The petition gathered hundreds of signatures in a few days, not only from parents at Little Stars, but from families at other daycare centers who recognized the same cold bureaucracy in their own experiences. The decisive turn came when one of the mothers, a freelance journalist, wrote a detailed article about the case for a local newspaper. The title was a direct stab at the system's heart. "When caring became a crime, the story of the teacher fired for loving too much." The article did more than tell Mary's story. It exposed the hypocrisy of a system that spent fortunes on educational toys while forbidding comforting hugs. Sarah, the director, initially tried to resist. She sent formal statements to families, quoting policies and procedures, threatening legal action for defamation. But the tide had turned irreversibly. More and more parents began openly questioning the daycare's methods, demanding meetings, threatening to withdraw their children. Then the most powerful moment of all took place, a Friday morning when 20 mothers, each holding a child's hand, appeared simultaneously at the daycare door for a surprise visit. It was not an aggressive protest, but a silent and powerful demonstration of solidarity. The children, seeing Mary, who had been invited by the mothers to be present, ran toward her like a river of love and repressed need. Liam hugged her legs. Chloe grabbed her hand. Noah proudly showed her a new drawing of stars. And Mary, surrounded by the children she had loved so deeply and the mothers who finally understood, felt something she had not felt since her dismissal. Not only validation, but a renewed hope that maybe, just maybe, love really could defeat bureaucracy. In that moment, with children laughing and hugging her, with the mothers forming a protective circle around her, with Sarah watching from the doorway, her expression shifting from defensive to something like doubt. Mary understood that her fall had not been in vain. She had touched a deep nerve in something much larger than herself, the universal hunger for genuine care in an increasingly mechanical and dehumanized world. And for the first time since everything had begun, she no longer felt like a victim, but like the spark that could ignite a silent revolution for the soul of childcare. The final confrontation revealed not only the transforming power of love over fear, but that the real terror we needed to face was not the children's fear in the dark, but our collective inability to see the invisible humanity behind every protocol, every rule, every metric of excellence that blinded us to what truly matters in the eyes of a frightened child. The meeting that would change the destiny of Little Stars Academy took place on an unusually bright spring afternoon, when sunlight poured through the conference room windows like a blessing. On one side of the long table sat Sarah, alone with her folder of documents and her professional defensiveness. On the other side sat Mary, flanked not by lawyers or union representatives, but by 20 determined mothers and, more importantly, 20 children who were the living proof of what was at stake. Sarah began by trying to maintain control with corporate jargon and manual citations. We need to consider legal liability, the established development parameters, the expectations of our stakeholders. But her words sounded hollow and lifeless in an environment saturated with genuine emotion. Then Jennifer, Chloe's mother, placed her laptop on the table and played not the video of the final incident, but a carefully edited compilation, scenes of Mary singing to frightened children, turning nightmares into peaceful dreams, creating corners of comfort where before there had only been rigid protocols. The video did not show rule breaking. It showed everyday miracles of human care. This, Jennifer said, her voice firm but emotional, is the standard of excellence we want for our children. Not empty metrics or certificates on a wall. We want someone who sees the fear in our children's eyes and responds not with rules, but with compassion. One by one, the other mothers spoke, each story adding another layer to a truth that was becoming impossible to deny. Amanda told how Liam had regressed emotionally since Mary's departure. Sophia showed Noah's drawings, which had shifted from dark colors and angular shapes to bright stars and smiling suns during the time Mary had been at the daycare. But the most powerful moment came when the children themselves, without being asked, began to move closer to Mary. Chloe rested her head in Mary's lap. Liam hugged her leg. Noah handed her a new drawing, this time not only of stars, but of a figure clearly meant to be Mary, surrounded by happy children. Sarah watched the scene, and something in her carefully controlled expression began to crack. She looked at the children, really looked, and perhaps for the first time saw not numbers in a report, not risks in a spreadsheet, but small, vulnerable human beings who needed much more than protocols could offer. She began, her voice trembling. I have always believed I was doing the right thing. Following best practices, protecting the institution, reducing risks. She paused, looking at Mary. But perhaps I became so focused on protecting the daycare from lawsuits that I forgot to protect it from losing what truly matters. What happened next was nothing short of revolutionary. Sarah did not only offer Mary her job back. She proposed something much bigger. Together, they would create a new emotional development program for the daycare, with Mary as lead consultant. The Star Corners, special spaces in every room where children could seek comfort during moments of fear or anxiety, with teachers trained not only in protocols, but in genuine emotional connection. The transformation did not stop at Little Stars. The local newspaper article gained national attention, and other daycare centers began adopting similar approaches. Mary, who had once been a retired teacher struggling to pay bills, became a respected voice in child care reform, traveling to conferences, giving talks, showing that it was possible to balance legal safety with human compassion. But the deepest legacy was not in certificates, articles, or implemented programs. It was in the small things. In Liam, who now slept peacefully in the center of the room. In Chloe, who laughed with genuine joy. In Noah, whose drawings were full of color and light. It was in the transformed relationship between Sarah and Mary, who went from adversaries to partners in a shared mission. It was in the mothers, who had learned that true care goes beyond expensive toys and elaborate curricula. And for Mary, the most significant transformation was internal. She was no longer the frightened woman trading dignity for sense. She was someone who had discovered that her greatest fear, not being enough, not being able to care for those she loved, was in fact her greatest strength. That the vulnerability she had feared so much was actually the bridge to genuine connection. That love, when offered freely, did not weaken her, but made her invincible. In the final scene, Mary is at home with Frank, holding his trembling hands between her own. The medical bills are still there. The future is still uncertain. But something fundamental has changed. She looks out the window at the stars her grandmother had loved so much, the same stars she now sings about to children in daycare centers across the country, and feels not fear, but a deep peace. Because she has finally understood that the true light is not in the stars out there, but in the one each of us carries inside, the light of love that overcomes every fear, transforms every darkness, and redeems even the deepest falls.